Hi guys! This week we're gonna switch locations and tackle a much overdue job aboard our other sailboat, Athena. We have this annoying voltage and frequency issue when we connect to shore power. We first noticed it down in Trinidad, but now that we're here in the US and we're gonna be here for a while, we need to do something about it because it's kind of annoying, and I think it's an issue that's going to plague a lot of boats coming from Europe to the US or from the US to Europe. As far as the hurricane damage DIY Catamaran and Terry's 44 project boat here, the paperwork is coming along swimmingly, and we should be able to finally purchase this hunk of fiberglass in the next couple of weeks. The whole ordeal of trying to purchase this project boat and the AdSense catastrophe that happened a few weeks back, which could have meant we could have lost 40% of our income, and moving our business from Europe to the US has been and continue to be extremely stressful. And that is why we're delighted to have BetterHelp as the sponsor of this video. Big life changes and big commitments can easily take a toll on our mental health. For us, buying this project boat is a huge commitment and not without risk. We all have different ways of processing our feelings and emotions. Some people like to turn to yoga. For me, working with my hands, for instance doing hours of sanding, helps me reflect and process whatever we're going through. But if I'm ever seriously struggling, I would have zero hesitation in getting professional help. Thanks to BetterHelp, getting connected to a licensed therapist has never been easier. You simply go to their website, you fill out a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you with a licensed therapist within usually 48 hours, so you can get started fast. You get the exact same quality you would with an in-office therapist, but in a much more convenient way, where you can communicate how and when you want. You can schedule live sessions over video chat, phone, or you can even message your therapist. And you can do that basically from anywhere, including standing on top of your most significant source of stress. So if you need help, let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist. Use our link, betterhelp.com/saillife, or choose Sail Life during sign up, and you'll enjoy a special discount on your first month. I'll also include our link down in the description. Thank you so much to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Now let's head back to Athena and get started on this annoying shore power issue. Everything here aboard Athena is 230 volts, 50 hertz from back in Europe. And that includes our cooktop here, our oven, water maker. All of our AC stuff is 230 volts, 50 hertz. Our isolation transformer that's located deep here in the pit of messiness takes the 120 volts on the dock and steps it up to somewhere around 250 volts. We'll get back to that a little bit later in the video. But once we do that, our inverter charger sinks to 60 hertz. That makes our 50 hertz combination oven here go yucky caca poo poo. It does not work on 60 hertz. There are big, heavy, expensive ways of fixing this frequency challenge, but for a smaller boat like Athena, I think I have a good idea for a somewhat cost-effective solution. Inverter chargers like this one are awesome. They have some really cool features like power assist, where this guy can help boost your shore power connection a little bit in case you don't have enough angry pixies from shore. This will just sprinkle a little bit extra on top. In this very specific instance, where we've taken Athena from Europe to the US with all of her 50 hertz stuff inside of her, I kind of wish we didn't have the inverter charger. I wish we'd had a separate inverter, because that way we wouldn't have the issue where the inverter charger sinks to the 60 hertz as soon as we connect to shore power. As you can see on our little servo display, right now we're connected to shore power at 60.3 hertz, and over here our AC loads are supplied with 60 hertz. Let me disconnect shore power, and you keep an eye on this little green box up here. As if by magic, that number dropped to 50 hertz. Here's the simplest possible drawing I could make for our current setup. We have shore power coming in, then we have our isolation transformer that in this case right now is taking the 120 volt and stepping it up to 240, 250, something like that. Then we have our big inverter charger here, our Quattro, that is 230 volts, that is connected to our batteries, so it can charge the batteries and also work as an inverter. And then of course from the Quattro we go over to our AC distribution panel here, where we've got the stove, outlets, water maker, stuff like that. The isolation transformer is another bit of awesome kit. It provides galvanic isolation. In our case right now, it's boosting the shore power up to a voltage we can actually use here aboard the boat, and it also provides some added safety. The only thing I don't like about our isolation transformer is the fact that it adds a 5% boost to the voltage. I'm sure Victron Energy did this with the best intentions in mind, figuring that maybe there's often a voltage drop on docks. I don't know if that was true in the past. Based on our vast experience of 3 marinas, it's not true anymore. In fact, 2 of the 3 had higher voltage on dock, sitting at around 130 volts, which becomes an issue because after you're done boosting the voltage in the isolation transformer, you end up above 270 volts on the secondary side, which is too high for the Quattro to use, so then effectively you can't connect to shore power. Fortunately, the fix for our frequency challenge will also fix the 5% boost issue with the isolation transformer. All of our Victron gear is connected to Victron's awesome VRM portal, and using that, now we haven't been here for a month, but if we extrapolate from this, we use about 10 kilowatt hours per day from shore power. We have about 7 kilowatt hours worth of lithium. That'll be a great buffer. So if we can just find a battery charger that we can connect to shore power, that'll provide more than 10 kilowatt hours in a 24-hour period, then we should be able to disconnect our Quattro 5000, and that should get rid of the pesky 50-60 Hertz challenge. A charger at 50 amps at 24 volts should be able to keep up with our energy needs, and Victron offers a few different models. But those chargers are basically the same price as a Multiplus 2000, which is an inverter charger that also has a 50 amp charger built in. So why not go for the inverter charger and also get an inverter and at least a single 120 volt outlet aboard the boat. Here we have our new AC system. We have the shore power connection over here. We're going to of course keep the isolation transformer. Once the new setup is in place, we're going to switch it so it doesn't do the doubling of the voltage, but just let the voltage go straight through. Then we have a 3-way switch here, which is this beefy guy right here that allows to power either the 230 volt side or the 120 volt side. Now this is a super simplified drawing. There are no breakers, there's no grounding on this. This is just to give you guys an overview. I will do my very best to have this new installation be ABYC compliant. But because we're out of room for more distribution panels over here, and also because I want to save a little bit of money, I'm not going to go with the fancy Blue Sea distribution panels. We're just going to go with a plain old boring gray box. Here is the new darling out of her box. She is a beaut. And also she came with a tiny little manual. Now this thing points out something that's very important, and that's the fact that this thing ships with a standard configuration. I think it might be for lead acid batteries, but of course that's not what we're going to be connecting to. So after we've gotten this connected to DC before we connect it to AC, it's very important that we go ahead and change that configuration. On the bottom of the box we have a little panel that's held in place by 2 screws. Underneath that there's our DC connection, our AC connection, as well as our connection to the VE bus, which is what we're going to use for configuring the inverter charger. When it comes to finding a good spot for mounting the new darling, it's a little bit of a slim pickings situation, because we would like to be close enough to the batteries that we don't have to use ginormous cables for the DC wiring. Even though it's going to eat up a little bit of room in our hanging locker, this bulkhead right here is my best suggestion so far. I like that there's really good ventilation there. I think the manual calls for about 10 centimeters of room around the inverter charger to help it breathe a little bit. And I also like that it's far above normal bilge water level. And of course it is nice and close to our batteries. Included with the lovely blue box is this little mounting bracket. So let's get that tossed up on the bulkhead. There are 4 mounting holes on this thing, 2 near the bottom and 2 near the top. To get to the top ones, you do have to take the cover off. The only other thing we need to find room for in the hanging locker is this little guy, which will essentially be our distribution panel. Inside of this little box we'll have one of these breaker RCD combos, and then we'll also add one of these little meters. Why bother with this little meter here? Well, it's an attempt to be ABYC compliant. A system voltmeter shall be installed on the main panel board if the system is permanently connected to an inverter or inverter charger. In terms of looks, there's no real competition here. These Blue Sea panels of course look a million times better than just this gray box, but yeah, this is a fraction of the cost. There's a bunch of stuff I've done to attempt to be ABYC compliant with this installation. It would probably be boring to run through the whole list, but there are a few of them that might be interesting. Like for instance, this green cable here. The green cable is of course for grounding, and if you look at the gauge of this cable, it is awfully similar to our two current carrying conductors here, the red and the black, and that is on purpose. A DC grounding connector shall not be smaller than one size under that required for the current carrying conductor supplying the device. In this particular case, I couldn't find the green wire in one size smaller than the red and the black, so I just went for the same size, which is perfectly fine. To figure out what gauge of cable to use, I could have gone through the tables from the ABYC, figured that out, but I could also just go with the recommendations of Victron here. It is a fairly short run, so they're recommending we use 35 square millimeters, which over here, very confusingly, is called 2 gauge. If we check the chart here for a 2 gauge, and this is a 105C wire, it's outside of the engine compartment, so we could get away with 210 amps. Victron is recommending a 200 amp fuse. No doubt the reason they're doing that is because of the peak power the Multiplus 2000 is able to put out, and that is 3500 watts. I was only able to find a 150 amp fuse down in Trinidad where we picked up all of this stuff. But if we take 3500 and divide that by 24, then we get slightly below 150. And I think the biggest thing we're ever going to connect to this thing is going to be a crock pot. So yeah, we should be fine. Let's get some cable lugs crimped on here. Hopefully I have a little bit of heat shrink in the technical compartment. As is evidenced by the 3 cables coming out the bottom, going over to our little battery compartment, we now have 24 volts. And that is the closest glimpse you guys are going to get of the battery compartment. It's a little bit messy in there. I'm not too proud of it. I'll have to tidy that up. It is on my list, but well, there's a lot of stuff on the list. To do the configuration of the new inverter charger, I'm going to use the Mark III gateway here and Victron Connect on my laptop. Unfortunately, this is the longest Ethernet cable I've got on the boat, so this is going to be a little bit awkward. Victron does a really good job of making their software easy to use. The very first thing I want to do is just to make sure that we are on the latest firmware, which we are not right now. The actual values you input into the configuration of the inverter charger are of course going to be wholly dependent on the setup on your boat, like your battery chemistry, whatever the manufacturer recommends. In our case, I'm going to go with the factory recommendations for our Winston cells. There's a setting in the new firmware that I'm kind of excited to play with, and that is the prioritize other energy sources setting under the advanced tab. Historically, it's been a little bit of a pain getting Victron gear to prioritize solar over shore power whenever connected to shore power, and I think this is their fix for that. We'll leave that setting off for now and just get the system up and running before we start playing. But yeah, let's move on to the AC side of things. There are a couple of things we need to do. We need to install the 3-way switch here. We already have a circuit breaker here, and there's a fun little side note here. Because we have the isolation transformer, that doesn't need to be an RCD. An ELCI or RCD shall be installed with or in addition to the primary shore power disconnect circuit breakers, exception installations where an isolation transformer are installed within 10 feet. Then we need to run a bit of cable from the 3-way switch here to the Multiplus, and then of course the very, very short distance from the Multiplus to our lovely gray box. We have a 105C cable and 30 amps, so it looks like we can get away with 12 gauge, but that is only for up to 3 AC conductors. We have more than 3 AC conductors, so we need to direct our attention over here. This table will allow between 7 and 24 conductors to be bundled, and for the same wire, 30 amps, we are looking at 10 gauge. Here on top is 10 gauge, and down here is 12 gauge. I find the whole flat cable situation, which is very common over here, a little bit annoying. I'm used to round cables, which I think are much easier to work with, because a lot of the strain reliefs and all of the Victron gear and also in these boxes is round. And now you're trying to squeeze a square peg through a round hole. But you can't always get all of the gauges over here in round, so we'll just have to make do. It's been a few hours and our state of charge is now up to 61%. So yeah, the charger is charging. But it is a little bit surprising that the Multiplus 2000 seems a lot louder than the Quattro 5000. I don't know how much the mic is picking it up, but to the ear, this seems louder than our bigger Quattro. And also this thing is hot. I can basically feel the heat radiating off of it with my hand here, and the thermal camera is saying that the hottest part of it is around 44 degrees Celsius. It is a few days later and I'm happy to report that the new inverter charger is performing really well. When it kicks on the charger, it does get a little bit loud. I would say it is louder than the Quattro 5000, but it is hard for me to accurately judge that because our Quattro is shoved all the way in the aft end of the messy compartment. As you might be able to hear right now, the Multiplus 2000 is not charging, and that's because I've unfurled our bottom solar panel, so we have the full 1600 watts out in the sun, which actually covers our usage in like the peak sun hours, so from like 9 to 5. Right now there is a little bit of a cloud going over, so we're not getting the full oomph, but only about 1200 watts from the sun. That is enough to cover our air conditioning and our other usage here on the boat in those peak sun hours between 9 or 10 and 5 o'clock. But as soon as the sun goes down, the Multiplus is gonna have to kick in. I wish I had some kind of 120 volt outlet so I can demonstrate the awesomeness of our new outlet there, but I'll hold off on getting a crockpot until Ava gets back so she can be a part of that decision. The addition of this outlet here is actually not great in the eyes of the ABYC if I'm reading the text correctly. The outlet is GFCI protected, it's the right size breaker, it's the right gauge cable, but the location of it is a little bit of a no-no. Receptacles provided for the galley shall be located so appliances cords can be unplugged without crossing a traffic area, stove, or sink. The whole point of installing this outlet here was so that we could use it for a crockpot that we want to put here on the stove, which is a nice gimbaled surface for if the boat gets rocking. But yeah, I don't know. It's not like the cord is going to be crossing the stove, it's just going to be going onto the stove. So I don't know if this is technically compliant. I think I'm okay with it, so yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think what might technically save my bacon here is the fact that the stove doesn't butt all the way up against this surface. There's a gap about yay big, so theoretically I could poke my hand in here and unplug without my hand crossing over the stove. So yeah, I don't know, but like I said, I'm okay with it. With the Multiplus 2000 installed and fully wired up, I can cross off the first item on Ava's little would like done list, and that is this one, the inverter. She has some other riveting tasks on here, like a forward door vent for our air conditioning so we don't have to keep the hanging door open. Then we want to fix the headliner, which I know that's been high on her list for a long time. Then we do need to replace the floor, and also we have some countertops that needs replacing. Some of those tasks will require some tools I don't currently have on the boat. Luckily for me, there's a pile of Bosch tools waiting for me somewhere in Texas. So next week we're going to take the Spiffy-mobile on a little bit of a road trip adventure and perform a little bit of a torture test on it and drive roughly 1,000 miles there. That's about 1,700 kilometers, or about the same distance from the Danish border to Rome. I am sure a few of you are curious about how the solar input is going to perform after we've now installed the Multiplus 2000. I don't necessarily think we have to enable that other charging sources feature I talked about earlier, because it looks like we're getting about the same input we normally get when we're completely disconnected from shore power. So that'll be cool to play around with for a little bit. But yeah, I hope to see all of you guys back aboard Athena next week for yet more DIY fun and a little bit of a road trip. So as always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!